Hello and welcome to CS303 Operating Systems, chapter number 1, lecture 5. So, in the initial part of this lecture, we will wrap up the chapter number 1, which was the introduction. And then in the later part of this lecture, we will get started with the next chapter, chapter number 2. Okay. So, chapter 1, lecture 5. Now I am on slide number 2, uh, which is titled IO subsystem. So here, what are these 1, 2, 3, and 4? So these are, part of the major goals or activities of the operating system, right? Process management, memory management, uh, disk management, and then finally IO management. Right? So IO subsystem. So which means that our OS is an operating system, right? OS is an operating system, and within that it has certain modules. It's an extremely large piece of software, so it has modules, and each of those modules can be they're a part of the system, so they can also be known as subsystems. Right? So therefore, the part of the OS that deals with IO is the IO subsystem. Okay. So and also uh, how did the OS get its name? So OS is called operating system. So here system refers to a computer system, and so the question is how do you operate a computer system, right? So the OS will generally takes care of the operation of your computer system. Right? So coming back to IO subsystem, one purpose of the OS is to hide peculiarities of hardware devices from the user, provide users with simple interface for performing IO. So generally, you'll have a large number of IO devices. Some of which are directly connected to your system, and some of which, using USB or some other technology you can connect. So you have various devices of various kinds. So the user really doesn't want to be bothered about how exactly they operate and what are their inner functionalities, how do things work, how do things work within those devices, right? So what the users want is a nice and clean interface to those devices, right? They need to, they need the ability to interact with those devices using a nice and clean interface, right? So that interface is provided by the OS. Right? So IO subsystem is responsible for memory management of IO, including buffering. So this we already looked at. The rate at which IO happens is quite slow, and the rate at which CPU is executing is very fast. So to store data, we definitely need buffers. So whenever data from from some kind of input device is written, it's written to a buffer, and then the OS can read it. So it is just about synchronizing the write and read, write from the device and read from the OS. So memory management of IO, including buffering, caching, right, storing parts of data in faster storage for performance. IO subsystem is also responsible for device drivers for specific hardware devices that provide the above interface. Right. So we know that each device has a device controller, right, which controls the operation of that device. The device controller is a piece of hardware, and then on it, some code also needs to run, so that it provides a good link between the device and the OS. So the device and the OS can talk to each other. Some code is needed to ensure that, and that code is what we call device driver. Okay. So more details will be on in chapter 13, which will talk about how the IO system interfaces to other parts of the OS, right? How it manages IO devices, and how it detects IO completion. So we have some rough idea about that, where we talked about how interrupt handlers and device drivers are used in the creation of good IO subsystems. So using an interrupt, we know how an IO is completed. We learned about that. So more details will follow in chapter 30. So one of the major tasks of an operating system is, to deal with input and output. So it has a whole part, IO subsystem, that does exactly that. Okay. Now I am on slide 3, and this is the last section of this chapter, open source operating systems. You may have heard about this term, open source operating system. So in general, we can classify operating systems into two broad categories: closed source and open source. Example of a closed source operating system, Windows. Example of an open source operating system, Linux. As the name suggests, what do we mean by open source? It means that the source code of the operating system is available in the public domain. Okay? So if I want to see the source code for Linux, I can easily do that. Right? So open source code is available in the public domain. Right? So what do we mean by open source? For the OS, the source code is available in the public domain. So one advantage of that is it can be changed and modified and compiled. So tomorrow if I want to improve an operating system functionality, maybe improve the memory management algorithm, right? Maybe I want to look at more efficient execution of interrupts. So I can change the source code, right? And I can suggest those changes, and hopefully they will be accepted. So because the source code is available, you can change it, compile it, and run it on your own. You can also copy and distribute open source software for free, right? So it is available for download and usage without charging any fee for the software. Right? So it is available in source code format. So for example, if an OS is written in C, that C code is available. Okay? So that C code is available. You can modify it, you can compile it, you can execute it. Closed source, on the other hand, is available in compiled binary code. So the code has already been compiled and the binary code is available. As you can see, bunch of zeros and ones. It's next to impossible to derive the source code from the compiled binary. Right? So that is closed source. And then you have operating systems in between. Right? So Apple's OS X has a hybrid approach, wherein some components are open source and some are closed source. Incidentally, the major component of Apple's OS X, which is the kernel, which is also named Darwin, that is open source. Some components may be closed source. So maybe their camera software or their music software, that may be closed source. Kernel is open source. So you can have different philosophies. You can have open source, you can have closed source, you can have something in between. Okay. Now I am on slide number 4, titled Open Source Operating Systems. So here we talk about some of the advantages of open source operating systems. So one is definitely they're ideal if you want to learn an OS, because for your because you have the capability to look into the detailed OS code. Okay. So essentially, what it means is that let's say if I want to find out how an operating system is doing memory management, which means how is it allocating memory to applications, right? So for example, if I have 5 applications that want to run, each of them have memory requirements. How is the allocation happening? Which process gets how much memory and where? So if I want to see how that function works, I can go into the source code and I can study it. So it's really great for learning operating systems. If I want to do that with closed source, because the code is not available in source code format, then that thing is not possible. Anyone can make a contribution to the OS to make it better. We talked about that. Improving a scheduling algorithm, cache policy, and so on. Okay. They're generally free. So whether you download the original version of software of the OS or whether you are upgrading it, so from time to time, operating system manufacturers will push upgrades also. So you may have seen your smartphone gets upgrades, right? So maybe they added some security feature, or maybe some OS functionality, they made it faster. So from time to time we get upgrades. So both the original OS and the upgrades are in general free. There is a dedicated community of programmers, online forums to help out users. So if you have any issue with Linux, you can just post on a forum, and you have a huge community which can help you out. Arguably more secure. So the reasoning for that is because since the source code is in public domain, so anyone can look at it. So you have a large bunch of people, programmers like you, students of OS, professors, people working in industry. Uh, Essentially, everybody has access to the code. They can see the code, and therefore they can suggest changes. So because more people have access to it, so the likelihood of finding security issues is definitely more. Whereas in the closed source, what happens is, let's say only people working at Microsoft will have access to the source code, right? So arguably, open source would be more secure. So these are some of the advantages of open source operating systems. Okay. Ideal for learning. Anyone can contribute to make it better. Generally free. Very good community to help out, and arguably more secure also. So now I am on slide 5. So here we do a discuss a brief history of open source, right? How it evolved. So back in the 1950s, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the top engineering schools in the world. So MIT had a tech model club that used to write programs and leave them in drawers. So you take a piece of paper, you write a program, could be something simple to read in a file, right, and then to print it. So they members of that club, they used to write programs, and then they used to leave them in drawers. Okay, inviting other members to look at the code and suggest changes. So the philosophy was, here's my program. Why don't you look at it, and why don't you see whether it works well? And if you have any suggestions, you can directly comment on that. And then the basic idea is that the program can be made better and better. So also companies such as Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, one of the very popular computer companies, and I think they used to sell computers till fairly recently, probably not anymore. So they accepted contributions from people for source code, right? Collected such programs and distributed them to interested users. So they will say, hey, we want to is there anybody who wants to propose a new scheduling algorithm for this OS? And many people will respond with their code, and then they will collect it, and then they will distribute it for users to test out and all. So as you can see, a very open philosophy. Everybody has access, everybody can see the code and make improvements. And not just the people working in the company. So companies such as Microsoft and Apple did not like this. Why? So reason is quite simple. Their philosophy is to make money from the operating system, right? So they wanted to make money from the OS, and that companies like Microsoft and Apple are one of the richest, one of the most profitable companies on the planet, and they make their money from the OS code. At least Microsoft. Apple also sells hardware. So because if you look at when you design an OS, most difficult thing is to make an initial effort and start from scratch. Once your OS is there, once it's working, then once you have a working OS, then you just have to make copies of it. So there's not much effort, and then for each copy you charge the same amount. Right? So some companies tied the OS to the hardware, so they were smart that way. So if you want to use iOS, you need to buy an iPhone. On the other hand, for Android, there are many options, many devices you can get. So same thing holds for desktops. If you want to use Windows, you can get an HP machine, you can get a Lenovo machine, and Dell machine, so on and so forth. Right? Surface machine. But if you want to use iOS and OS X, you need to get Apple machine. So of course, this uh, concept is no longer fully valid because you can use virtualization to run a totally different OS on your machine. So this is partly true now. Okay. Now I am on slide 6. So title for this is open source operating systems again. Slide number 6, open source operating systems. So Linux, we know, a very popular operating system. It's used in most of our labs. Was started by a gentleman named Linus Torvalds. So he was a research student from Finland. Right? So perhaps if you spend the effort, you can design a new OS or improve it. It would be a really nice project to do. So Linux comes in many flavors. There's Red Hat, Fedora, Debian, Ubuntu. So I believe that in our lab machines we have Ubuntu installed. So to look at all different Linux projects, kinds of Linux versions, you can visit this website called DistroWatch. So each Linux version is called a distribution. So if you go to DistroWatch, you can see various kinds of distribution and all other information, news regarding Linux. So it's a good website to watch. You should visit. You should definitely do that. Okay. So and of course, as we mentioned, Linux can be run on a Windows or Apple machine using virtualization. So very soon we'll have a demo of that. So what you need to do is you need to install VMware Player or a VirtualBox tool. It's a piece of software, virtualization software. Download a Linux distribution, pick anyone you want, and then run it as an application. So as we said, the OS itself runs as a processor program within the host OS. Okay. Another open source operating system, Unix. This is the one on which Apple's OS is based. So initially we had Unix, and then it branched to Linux, and then Unix was of course still there, which Apple used. Okay. So here, some parts are open source and some are closed source. So the open source, as we said, Darwin kernel is available for open source, and if you want to look at it, you can visit the website opensource.apple.com. So there, what Apple has done is a lot of their software tools, they have open sourced them. So to open source means they have made the source code public. So generally now even companies like Microsoft are embracing this culture of open source, and they have also started open sourcing a lot of their tools. Solaris is another operating system, another variant of Linux. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 7. So this just shows a desktop of the Solaris operating system. So this is again, as we discussed, a version of Unix. So this was proposed in 73. So just to give you a timeline, initially we had Unix in the 70s, and then in the 90s we had Linux and Solaris and so on. So this is a desktop of the Solaris operating system. So this was very popular in the 90s and the early 2000s. So I remember when we were doing our PhD in 1999 and then early 2000s, 2002, 2004. So we did use Solaris machines in our lab. Okay. So at that time it was very popular. Linux was a bit less popular. Now I think Linux is much more popular. So this just shows the Solaris desktop. So you can see some help viewer is there. On the bottom you see a desktop. You can see CPU and disk activities, the web browser, calendar, and then some file viewer is open. So this is the user interface, the desktop of Solaris operating system, which was owned by Sun. So that was the company Sun. Okay, now I am on slide 8. So this is a very interesting picture. So which I got this from Wikipedia. So thanks to Wikipedia, I've referred that, and this just shows a timeline of you know history of Unix and its Unix-like systems. So it shows a history of Unix and Unix-like systems. So you can see at the top 1969 unnamed PDP operating system gave rise to Unix different versions 1 to 4 then 5 to 6. You had BSD, another popular version of Unix, and then some of them branched out to Sun. So this Solaris we were talking about, BSD had a lot of versions. It shows, right, HP, UX, and so on. And then Linux also, you can see Minix is another Unix-like system, and then Linux, of course, the popular one, started in 1991 and then going on different versions. So this just shows you that Unix was an extremely path-breaking operating system proposed in the late 60s, early 70s, and a lot of operating systems now are derived from it, right? At least two of the big three. So if we say that the big three operating systems for desktops and laptops are Windows, Linux, and Apple. So then Apple and Linux are they are derived from Unix, some version of Unix or the other. Okay, so this chart just shows us all Unix and Unix-like systems. So it would be worthwhile for you to study it. Okay. So now I am on slide 9, open source software. So here we just list some examples of open source software, so which you are encouraged to try out and to support their programmers who have come up with these applications. So Microsoft Office, definitely closed source by Microsoft, and its open office equivalents or its open source office equivalents are Open Office or WPS Office or Google Docs also. So WPS Office is available at wps.com. Google Docs, I'm sure all of you would already be using. For programming, Emacs programming editor, available at that link. Okay. For web browser, Mozilla Firefox. For databases, MySQL. So closed source equivalent is Oracle database. Open source is MySQL. MATLAB for numerical computation. Its open source equivalent is Scilab. Available at scilab.org. And I'm sure you would have heard of a VLC player. There's probably no audio video file in the world, no format that the VLC player cannot play. So it's available at this website, videoland.org. Image editing, GIMP is available. And for these applications, in many cases their mobile versions are also available. So VLC definitely has a mobile version, Firefox definitely mobile version, and so on. Okay. And there are many more examples of open source software, so which we should try out, and we should support these open source softwares. Okay. Now I am on slide 10, which is a recap of open source operating systems. Slide 10, open source operating systems recap. So these are what is an open source operating system? These are those operating systems which are made available in source code format. So the source code, let's say the C code, is available in the public domain, as opposed to closed source operating systems for which just the compiled binaries are available. So these were started by the Free Software Foundation, FSF, right, which has so the joke is normally they have a copyright, right? So These people call it copyleft, right? So GNU public license. So whenever you download their pieces of software, this license comes and it allows you to freely modify and distribute it. So GNU operating system and Free Software Foundation. So in case you're interested, you can visit gnu.org. So gnu.org, where you can find out more about this Free Software Foundation. Okay. So examples of these kinds of software, open source software, include Linux and Unix, even Mac, Apple's Mac OS X, the kernel is open source, and many more. Can use a virtualization manager to like VM Player or VirtualBox to run guest operating systems for exploration. So in case you want to explore how Solaris, the look and feel of Solaris, Linux of course you'll get a lot of exposure. So in case there's an OS for which you want to get some exposure to it, you can always use VirtualBox to run it on your machine. So that would be an exercise worth doing. So all are available for free, and definitely that is encouraged, right? So now I am on slide 11, summary of chapter 1. So you can see quite a long chapter where we gave an overview of many things and a glimpse of what is to come in the course. So slide 11, chapter 1. So now we know that the operating system, so some program which tells us or which lays down the rules and ensures the correct operation of a computer system. So the operating system is a software that manages the hardware resources, right, among many applications that are running, and B, provides a convenient environment for users to run programs. So an operating system makes running programs very easy and convenient for users. If the operating system layer was not there, then programs would have to run directly on the hardware, which is very difficult and very tedious. Okay. Some broad goals of a general purpose operating system: convenient user interface, efficient utilization of resources, right? So an operating system has many jobs it has to do, right, based on its goals: process management, memory management, storage management, IO management, protection and security. So you can see that managing the various resources is definitely one of the top jobs, and to provide protection security also. Okay. We had a very brief overview of a computer system and various architectures. Right? We looked at single CPU system, multiple CPU system, distributed, peer-to-peer, cloud, real-time, multimedia, mobile. Right? We had an introduction to some of the core operating system features, right? Multi-programming, multitasking, ability to juggle among programs, right, to give the illusion of parallel processing, and to improve the response times, right? And we looked at dual mode security mechanism for an operating system. So we have user and kernel modes. So when you are in user mode, the CPU can execute only a subset of the instructions and can access only a subset of the memory. When you are kernel, you have unrestricted access. You can execute any instruction. You can execute any. You can access any part of memory. So whenever you are accessing any OS feature, right? Generally, you have a system call, and that has to be run in kernel mode. Okay, so we'll have more details on on system calls in the next chapter. So we defined various architectures: uniprocessor, multiprocessor, distributed. So probably I mentioned that already earlier in the above point. Discussed about various computing environments. So this also, some of these I mentioned. Right? Traditional mobile cloud. And finally, we talked about open source operating system, mostly about Unix and Linux. Right? So this is essentially a summary of chapter number 1. And with that, we come to the end of the first chapter. Okay, first chapter is finished.